A father acted strangely nervous during a routine checkup with his 5 young daughters. When the nurse saw their blood test results, she began to panic, realizing something was terribly wrong. The late evening air hung heavy with humidity in McAllen, Texas, a small border town known for its steady stream of migrant crossings. Just a stone's throw from the Rio Grande, the Rio Care Family Health Center stood as a beacon of hope for many seeking medical attention, both locals and those hoping to make a new life on American soil. Sarah Miller moved efficiently around the emergency room, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun as she diligently filed away patient paperwork. At 35, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew her profession well, despite having relocated from San Antonio just the previous week. The walls of the clinic still felt somewhat unfamiliar, but the fundamental routine of healthcare remained the same anywhere. The clock on the wall indicated 8 p.m. Sarah glanced at it with mild relief. Only 2 more hours until closing time. The clinic had been bustling earlier in the day, but the crowd had thinned considerably as the evening wore on. Now, most of the remaining patients patiently waiting appear to be immigrants, their faces etched with that particular blend of hope and weariness that Sarah had quickly learned to recognize. Having just finished attending to a patient, she walked out of the ER room into the waiting area. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh, sterile glow over the worn tile floor as she returned to the nurse's station to complete some lingering paperwork. As she worked, Sarah's eyes drifted across the waiting room, eventually settling on a man sitting with 5 young girls. They were all dressed simply but neatly, the girls clad in similar jeans and colorful tops. The man appeared to be of Hispanic descent, his expression a complex mixture of fatigue and palpable nervousness. Sarah turned to the fellow nurse standing nearby, a man in his 40s named Carlos, who had been efficiently handling the flow of patients all evening. Who were they waiting for? Sarah asked quietly, nodding subtly toward the family. Carlos looked up briefly from his computer screen, his eyes scanning the waiting area before returning to his work. I think they've been waiting for quite a while. I'm not sure, he replied kindly, though it was clear his attention was divided. Elena frowned slightly. Have they had their vitals taken? It's standard procedure before seeing the doctor. I don't think so, Carlos responded, still focused intently on his screen. They've just been sitting there waiting. Sarah nodded decisively. I'll check them out. She approached the family, offering a warm, professional smile as she came to stand before them. The man looked up at her approach, his expression difficult to decipher. Hello, I'm Nurse Sarah Miller. She introduced herself clearly. Have you had your vitals checked yet? The man straightened slightly in his seat. We're waiting for Dr. Alan Briggs for vaccinations and some blood tests. Sarah tilted her head slightly, inquiring further. May I ask for what purpose? To complete our papers, the man explained, his voice low and steady. To pass the border to the USA. Sarah considered this information for a moment. I haven't seen Dr. Briggs all day today. Let me check the schedule for you. But first, may I please see your patient registration paper? The man reached into his pocket and produced a folded form, which he carefully handed to Sarah. She scanned it quickly, noting the details. Michael Rodriguez, 42 years old, accompanied by Sophia, 10, Isabella, 9, Valentina, 8, Anna, 7, and Lucia, 5. All were listed as Mexican nationals. Sarah looked at each of the girls in turn, immediately struck by their unusual, almost unnerving stillness. They sat quietly beside Michael, with the youngest, Lucia, perched calmly on his lap. There was none of the typical fidgeting, whispering, or restless energy that Sarah usually associated with children, especially after what must have been a long wait. All right, Sarah said with a deliberately reassuring smile. Please wait here. I'll check on Dr. Briggs's schedule right away. She returned promptly to the nurse station where Carlos was now entering data into the computer system. Dr. Briggs isn't working today, he informed her plainly when she asked. He had an emergency appointment and took the day off. Sarah frowned, perplexed. The man over there says he has a specific appointment with Dr. Briggs for himself and the children. They're unusually quiet, almost unnervingly so. Don't you think that's strange? Carlos looked over at the family again, this time a bit more intently. I think I've seen that man before. He's a patient of Dr. Briggs. Don't worry too much about him, he added with a slight chuckle. And honestly, he's lucky to have daughters who behave so remarkably well. Otherwise, he'd be living in a jungle. Sarah hesitated slightly. There are a lot of immigrants here, so I just want to be extra careful when something seems unusual. Carlos glanced over at the family once more. Welcome to Border Town Healthcare, he said with a slight, knowing shrug. Sarah hesitated again, but eventually nodded. Maybe they're just incredibly well-behaved. She returned to Michael and the girls. I'm very sorry, but Dr. Briggs is off work today. The system mentioned he has an emergency appointment outside the clinic. Michael's expression shifted rapidly, a flash of confusion and distinct nervousness crossing his features before he quickly regained his composure. You don't understand, he insisted, his voice tighter, more strained than before. I have an appointment with Dr. Briggs. The doctor himself explicitly told me to come here at this specific day and time. Sarah tried to maintain her professional calm. It looks like you might already have his personal number. Perhaps you could try reaching out to him directly? We are aware that many family doctors, especially dedicated ones like Dr. Briggs, often share their personal numbers for necessary follow-ups. Michael's face darkened visibly with anger. What kind of service is this? He demanded, his voice rising slightly in frustration. You should call the doctor. We have an appointment scheduled here. This is the clinic where he works. I completely understand your frustration, Sarah said calmly, attempting to de-escalate the situation. Please excuse me for a moment while I try to reach him for you. She walked back to the nurse station where Carlos was now attending to another patient. Sarah picked up the phone and dialed Dr. Briggs's number, but there was no answer. She then tried his home number as listed in the hospital database, with the same unsuccessful result. As she waited through the futile ring cycles, Sarah glanced back toward Michael. He was visibly anxious now, nervously scratching his head, shifting restlessly in his seat, and typing rapidly on his phone. The stark contrast between his escalating agitation and the girl's continued eerie stillness struck her as even more peculiar and unsettling. After several failed attempts to reach Dr. Briggs, Sarah headed back to speak with Michael again. As she approached, she saw him abruptly rise from his seat and answer a phone call, stepping away quickly toward the nearby emergency staircase for privacy. The girls remained seated, completely unmoving. Sarah waited patiently with them, attempting some small talk with the children to ease the awkward silence. But none of them responded beyond brief, almost imperceptible nods or monosyllabic answers. From beyond the heavy emergency door, she caught fragments of Michael's increasingly agitated conversation. Tomorrow? Yes. Give me time, please. Yes, I'll pay. Sarah looked around discreetly, wondering if anyone else had overheard, but the remaining staff and patients seemed entirely engrossed in their own concerns. A growing sense of profound unease began to settle deep in her stomach as she waited for Michael to return. Michael returned from the stairwell, his face now set in a tight mask of controlled tension as he approached Sarah. She offered a professional, reassuring smile, though her instincts were quietly sounding insistent alarms. I tried Dr. Briggs's office phone and his home number, but unfortunately, I couldn't reach him, she explained clearly. I'm very sorry for the inconvenience this has caused. Michael looked frustrated, but not overtly aggressive. He ran a hand agitatedly through his hair. I'm wasting valuable time here, he said, his voice low but intense. I really need to get the girls vaccinated because we plan to go across the border very soon and seek asylum. I had arranged pickup over there, and with this unexpected delay, everything else on my tight schedule will be seriously affected, too. Sarah took another, closer look at the patient registration papers, carefully studying the details she had only skimmed initially. I see you need vaccinations for DTaP, which covers diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, and polio, she read aloud. MMRV for measles, mumps, rubella, and varicella, plus separate ones for hepatitis A and hepatitis B. This is all for your asylum application procedure, correct? Michael nodded tersely, confirming. Yes, that's absolutely right. Well, Sarah said, making a quick, decisive judgment call. If you don't mind, I can administer the vaccinations myself. I'm a certified nurse practitioner, so I'm fully qualified to do this. However, she added, we'll also need to perform a blood test as part of the standard pre-vaccine health screening. It's routine protocol to screen for hepatitis B and run a standard comprehensive blood panel. Michael's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of alarm in them. Blood test? They don't need that. The children are perfectly fine. Sarah maintained her professional demeanor steadfastly. Due to our clinic being situated in a border town with specific health protocols, it's standard procedure here. No, Michael repeated firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. That's absolutely not necessary. Sarah considered his resistance for a moment, then carefully offered an alternative. We do have other doctors available in the clinic who could potentially see you, but there's currently a queue. You would need to wait until those previously registered patients are served first, or possibly, if someone cancels or skips their appointment, I could try to help insert you in between. She paused deliberately, then added a crucial point, but please understand, the doctor would also order the very same blood test that I just mentioned. Michael seemed visibly torn, his eyes darting anxiously between Sarah and the girls, who continued to sit in their unnerving, eerie stillness. Would you be doing this entirely alone? He asked finally, his voice cautious. No other practitioners involved. And, he pressed, you'll personally drop the sample at the lab yourself and check the results yourself? Sarah found the specificity of his question strange, almost suspicious, but answered professionally and truthfully. Yes, as a nurse practitioner, I am authorized to order the lab tests and handle the sample collection and associated paperwork. I will sign off on the collection along with the designated lab tech staff. But please note, I am not authorized to sign the official final lab results. Only authorized lab personnel can officially do that. Michael seemed to be weighing his limited options very carefully. He pulled out his phone again and appeared to be looking intently at previous lab reports stored on it, though the text was far too small for Sarah to read without being overly obvious about her interest. After a long, tense moment, he exhaled deeply. Okay, he finally said, meeting her eyes directly. I'll trust you. A wave of relief washed over Sarah, though an underlying tension remained. Great, she said, gesturing toward the hallway leading to the examination rooms. Please follow me, all of you. As they walked down the quiet corridor, Sarah couldn't shake the persistent, nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. The girls moved in near-perfect, almost robotic unison, following their father without uttering a single word or casting even a curious glance at their surroundings. In Sarah's extensive experience, children in clinical settings were typically curious, noticeably nervous, or often a combination of both. But these particular girls displayed absolutely none of these expected emotions. She led them into an examination room, making a conscious effort to maintain a cheerful, reassuring demeanor that completely belied her growing internal concern. She silently reassured herself that if something truly was wrong, the mandatory blood test would surely reveal it. We'll start by taking everyone's vitals and then move on to the blood draw, she explained clearly, directing them toward the chairs positioned along the wall. Michael nodded silently, his intense eyes following Sarah's every single move as she meticulously prepared her equipment. The weight of his constant, unwavering gaze made her increasingly uncomfortable, but she forced herself to focus entirely on her professional duties. The examination room was painted a calming shade of pale blue, though the intended soothing effect was somewhat diminished by the harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lighting overhead. Standard medical posters adorned the walls, depicting detailed human anatomy and common childhood ailments. Sarah gestured for the girls to sit on the chairs arranged neatly against the wall while she methodically prepared her necessary equipment. I'll take your vitals one by one, starting with Sophia, the oldest, Sarah announced, offering a gentle smile toward the eldest girl. She worked methodically and efficiently, checking Sophia's blood pressure, temperature, pulse, and oxygen saturation levels. The girl complied completely silently, her large, dark brown eyes focused intently on some indeterminate point on the linoleum floor. Sarah tried to engage her with casual, friendly questions about school and her favorite subjects, but Sophia's responses were absolutely minimal, uttered barely above a faint whisper. "You're doing great, Sophia," Sarah encouraged warmly, making a quick note on her chart before moving smoothly on to Isabella, the next oldest girl. Sarah repeated the exact same process with each subsequent girl, finding the identical pattern with all of them: quiet, passive compliance, minimal to no eye contact, and extremely brief, almost reluctant responses. Michael stood rigidly nearby throughout the entire process, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his watchful eyes never once leaving the proceedings. "Would you perhaps like to wait outside in the hallway while I draw their blood?" Sarah suggested politely to Michael as she prepared the blood collection equipment, laying out needles, tubes, and alcohol swabs. "Some parents find this part difficult to watch." "No," Michael replied firmly, his tone resolute. "I'll stay right here with my daughters." Sarah simply nodded, not wanting to push the issue further or create unnecessary conflict. She began with Sophia again, gently and clearly explaining exactly what she was doing as she carefully tied the tourniquet around the girl's upper arm and meticulously swabbed the inside of her elbow with an alcohol wipe. "This will just pinch a little bit," she warned softly before skillfully inserting the needle. Sophia didn't even flinch. Her expression remained completely unchanged, almost unnervingly blank, as Sarah efficiently filled the required collection tubes. "You're being very brave," Sarah commented kindly, applying a small, sterile bandage to the puncture site. Sophia offered no response whatsoever. As Sarah worked her way through drawing blood from each subsequent child, she continued her persistent attempts at friendly, light-hearted conversation, hoping desperately to coax even a small spark of personality or normalcy from them. "Do you girls have a favorite game you all like to play together?" she asked brightly as she drew blood from Valentina, the middle child. Before any of the girls could even formulate an answer, Michael interjected sharply. "They don't play much. They mostly study. It's extremely important for their future." Sarah immediately noted the distinct, sharp edge in his voice and observed how the girls seemed to physically shrink slightly at his sudden intervention. She caught Valentina glancing quickly, almost fearfully, at her father before immediately lowering her eyes again to stare at the floor. After successfully collecting all the necessary samples, Sarah labeled each vial meticulously with the corresponding patient barcode sticker, acutely aware of Michael's unwavering, intense attention focused on her every single action. "I'll take these directly to the lab now," Sarah stated clearly, gathering the tray of labeled tubes. "You can all wait here comfortably for a few minutes." "No," Michael immediately said, rising abruptly from his chair. "We'll come with you." Sarah hesitated briefly, finding his insistence highly unusual and somewhat concerning, but she couldn't immediately think of a valid professional reason to refuse his request. "All right then, please follow me." They walked together through the quiet corridor towards the clinic's laboratory, Michael carefully herding the girls along directly behind Sarah like a flock of strangely silent, obedient ducklings. At the lab's drop-off window, Sarah handed over the tray containing the blood samples to a technician waiting inside. Before she could even turn away, Michael stepped forward assertively, calling out to the lab technician. "Those samples are for my children," he stated firmly, pointing emphatically to himself. "I'm Michael Rodriguez." Sarah watched this unusual interaction with growing surprise and unease. It was certainly not common practice for patients or their guardians to address lab technicians directly regarding their samples in this manner. "You seem like a very responsible and caring father," Sarah commented casually as they stepped away from the lab window, keeping her tone deliberately light despite her inner turmoil. "And the girls all behave exceptionally well." Though she maintained a pleasant demeanor, Sarah was subtly probing, trying desperately to understand the complex and unsettling dynamics at play. Something felt distinctly off, though she still couldn't pinpoint exactly what was truly wrong. Michael's expression softened slightly, almost imperceptibly. "In Mexico, It's unfortunately very common for samples to get mixed up or lost in labs. He explained somewhat plausibly. I just want to be absolutely certain everything is accurate for their records. Sarah nodded understandingly, though her suspicions lingered. You really don't need to worry here. We are extremely careful and meticulous with all patient samples, she assured him professionally. She gestured toward the designated waiting area located near the lab. You can wait comfortably here for the results. It shouldn't take too long to process them. As she turned to leave, she added courteously, I'll come back to find you for the vaccinations as soon as the results are ready. Walking away down the corridor, Sarah couldn't shake the persistent, nagging feeling that something was profoundly wrong with the Rodriguez family. The girl's unnatural, almost eerie quietness, Michael's constant hovering presence and intense scrutiny, his peculiar insistence on following her directly to the lab. All of it struck her as highly unusual and deeply concerning. Still, she couldn't help but wonder if perhaps she was overanalyzing the situation, letting her newcomer status cloud her judgment. Maybe Michael was simply an overly protective father, anxious about navigating a foreign healthcare system, or perhaps it was merely a cultural difference she didn't fully understand. Things were certainly different here in this border town compared to her previous experience in San Antonio, or perhaps even different than in Mexico. Without any concrete, undeniable signs of actual wrongdoing, all she felt she could responsibly do was uphold her professionalism to the highest standard and remain quietly, keenly observant. Sarah returned to the relative calm of the nurse station, her mind still heavily preoccupied with the perplexing Rodriguez family. The clinic was noticeably quieter now, with less than an hour remaining until closing time. Only a small handful of patients remained scattered throughout the main waiting room, most looking visibly tired after what had likely been a long and stressful day for them. Carlos was still dutifully at the desk, diligently updating patient records in the clinic's electronic system. Sarah leaned casually against the counter beside him, deliberately keeping her voice low to maintain confidentiality. That man with the 5 daughters, she began cautiously. Did you happen to notice how strangely they were all acting? She asked, seeking validation for her unease. Carlos looked up from his computer screen, a questioning expression on his face. What do you mean by strange? The girls were just so incredibly quiet, almost unnaturally so, Sarah elaborated, feeling a need to explain her gut feeling. And the father followed me closely all the way to the lab, meticulously watched me hand over the blood samples, and then even specifically called out to the lab tech to make absolutely sure they knew exactly which samples belonged to his children. It just felt off. Carlos chuckled softly, shaking his head slightly with an air of seasoned experience. Elena, he began, mistakenly using her former colleague's name before correcting himself. Sarah, this is the Border Town Clinic. Every single day, strange and unusual things happen here. You really need to learn how to effectively tell the difference between simple culture shock or anxiety and genuine, real threats. Sarah considered his words carefully, trying to be objective. I know it's not technically wrong, per se, she conceded. It just seems undeniably weird to me. I definitely felt the exact same way during my first few months working here, Carlos admitted with a sympathetic, understanding smile. Trust me, you'll eventually get used to it. Sarah nodded slowly, still not entirely convinced, but willing to entertain the possibility that her newcomer status might indeed be coloring her perceptions more than she realized. By the way, she shifted the topic slightly. What about Dr. Briggs? I've been working here for a week now and still haven't actually seen him around. Oh, Dr. Briggs? He's a highly respected senior doctor here, Carlos replied readily. Considered one of the very best medical professionals in this entire border town region. He primarily works here at the clinic, but not exclusively, Carlos continued to explain. He also takes on private consultations outside the clinic and frequently does patient visitations at their homes or other locations. So, it's quite possible Michael was somehow mistaken about the appointment, or perhaps there was simply some miscommunication between him and the doctor regarding the time or location. Carlos shrugged nonchalantly. It happens sometimes. Dr. Briggs has a very large patient base, especially among the local immigrant community. He's built quite a strong reputation for himself over the years. Their conversation was abruptly interrupted by another staff member needing Carlos's immediate assistance with a different matter. Sarah excused herself politely and decided to head toward the emergency room area to ensure everything was properly in order and prepared for the upcoming closing procedures. As she walked down the hallway, she happened to catch sight of Michael again through a nearby window. He was standing outside in the clinic's dimly lit parking lot, speaking intently on his phone once more. The 5 girls were with him, huddled together. 3 of the older ones were leaning heavily against each other, seemingly fast asleep while sitting slumped on a cold metal bench near the entrance. The youngest, little Lucia, however, was still awake, clutching tightly onto her father's hand as he continued his phone conversation. Sarah watched discreetly as Michael momentarily stepped away from the bench, still engaged in the call. Lucia initially started to follow him, but he quickly gestured firmly for her to stay put with her sisters on the bench. The little girl reluctantly complied, returning quietly to sit beside her sleeping siblings. Michael moved further away toward the edge of the parking lot, his expression growing increasingly agitated and stressed as he spoke into the phone. From her vantage point inside the clinic, Sarah suddenly saw another man approach Michael stealthily from the deeper shadows of the parking lot. The stranger was dressed in casual clothes, his face partially obscured in the dim evening light, making identification difficult. Michael's entire posture changed instantly upon the man's arrival. He stood noticeably straighter, almost respectfully, and his movements became more deferential as he briefly patted the stranger's shoulder in greeting. Deeply concerned about the young children left seemingly unattended on the bench outside, Sarah made the quick decision to go out and check on them personally. She exited quietly through the ER side doors and carefully approached the girls sitting on the bench. Lucia perked up slightly at her approach, acknowledging her presence, though the older girls remained completely still, either deeply asleep or in a state very close to it. Michael quickly noticed Sarah's presence near his daughters and abruptly ended his conversation with a hasty wave and a brief, almost formal handshake to the mysterious stranger, who then immediately slipped away back into the encompassing shadows and disappeared from view. Michael hurried back over to the bench, his expression a complex mixture of surprise at seeing Sarah there and underlying weariness. "Is something wrong?" he asked somewhat defensively, automatically positioning himself protectively between Sarah and the girls. "I just saw the girls sitting out here alone and wanted to make sure they were okay," Sarah explained calmly, maintaining a neutral tone. "It's getting quite late and a bit chilly." Michael seemed to relax slightly at her explanation. "They're just tired from the long day. You're all welcome to come back inside the waiting area," Sarah offered politely. "It's certainly more comfortable with the air conditioning running." "No, it's okay," Michael insisted firmly, declining her offer. "Leave the girls here. They actually love the warm outside air compared to the dry, cold air conditioner inside." Before Sarah could formulate a response to his somewhat unusual preference, her pager suddenly beeped insistently, demanding her attention. She glanced down at the small screen. The message was from the lab. "The blood test results are ready," she informed Michael matter-of-factly. "I'll come find you again after I've reviewed them, and then we can proceed with administering the vaccinations as planned." Michael simply nodded, his intense gaze following her intently as she turned and walked back toward the clinic building. Sarah couldn't help but feel the distinct sensation of his eyes fixed on her back, watching her every single move with unnerving scrutiny. The corridor leading back to the lab suddenly felt much longer than usual as Sarah made her way down it, her own footsteps echoing softly against the polished linoleum floor. Her pager felt unusually heavy in her scrub pocket. The simple, routine message from the lab seemed to carry an unspoken weight, a sense of foreboding she couldn't quite explain or shake off. At the lab window, a technician, a middle-aged man named Donnie Rain, whom Sarah had interacted with briefly a few times during her first week at the clinic, handed her the printed results for the 5 Rodriguez girls. "Everything looks perfectly normal," Donnie announced with a seemingly casual, easy smile, though Sarah couldn't help but notice the faint traces of sweat glistening on his brow despite the cool, controlled temperature inside the lab environment. Just healthy kids. Sarah observed him briefly, a fleeting flicker of recognition, or perhaps suspicion, stirring regarding his posture and demeanor, then offered a polite, standard thank you before stepping aside to meticulously review the results herself. Her eyes moved steadily and methodically across the pages, carefully scanning each line item for any potential irregularities, anomalies, or warning signs. According to the official reports she held, all 5 girls indeed had completely normal blood work results. There is absolutely no trace of any drugs, sedatives, or anything else remotely alarming indicated in their systems. A significant wave of relief washed over her. Despite her persistent suspicions about Michael's odd behavior and the girls' unsettling quietness, at least it seemed the children weren't being actively drugged or otherwise physically endangered in that specific way. She duly signed the required paperwork, officially confirming that she had reviewed the results as per protocol. As Sarah turned and headed back toward the clinic's main exit area to find Michael and his daughters and proceed with the vaccinations, she saw them already making their way back inside the building. Michael was now carefully carrying the sleeping Lucia gently in his arms, while the 4 older girls trudged wearily alongside him, their movements visibly sluggish with accumulated fatigue. The lab tests came back clear, Sarah informed him with a practiced, professional smile, masking her lingering unease. We can now proceed with the vaccinations. She then guided them into the designated treatment room, where the various vaccines had already been carefully prepared and set out in advance by another staff member. The girls settled quietly in a row on the examination chairs, their heavy eyelids drooping noticeably with fatigue, except for little Lucia, who now sat surprisingly alert in her father's protective arms, her bright, wide eyes filled with the boundless energy so typical of a 5-year-old, even at this late hour. It always amazed Sarah how these little ones somehow managed to find a second wind, an unexpected burst of energy in the late evenings. Sarah carefully prepared the first dose, clearly explaining the vaccination process to both Michael and the attentive girls. Each of you girls will receive 4 separate injections today, she detailed precisely. One is for diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis combined with polio, DTaP-IPV. Another is for measles, mumps, rubella, and varicella, MRV. And then there are 2 separate injections for hepatitis A and hepatitis B. She began with Sophia, the eldest, administering each injection carefully and praising her sincerely for staying so remarkably still throughout the process. The girl barely reacted to the needles at all, her expression remaining completely blank and passive. Isabella was similarly stoic and unresponsive during her turn receiving the shots. As Sarah prepared to vaccinate Valentina, the 3rd oldest girl, the child's face suddenly turned visibly pale. "I feel sick," she whispered faintly. These were the very first words Sarah had actually heard her speak since they met. "Do you perhaps need to use the bathroom?" Sarah asked gently, leaning closer. "I can certainly walk with you if you like." Before Valentina could even formulate a response, Michael abruptly stood up. "I'll take her," he stated firmly, gripping his daughter's arm tightly. "Where's the nearest bathroom?" Sarah pointed toward the door directly across the narrow hallway. "It's right over there." Michael initially called for Lucia, the youngest, to come along with him as he guided the nauseous Valentina toward the door, but Sarah gently intervened, reassuring him confidently that Lucia could safely stay with her for a few moments. Just then, Valentina suddenly gagged audibly, and Michael quickly hurried her into the bathroom, leaving Lucia behind in the examination room with Sarah and her other sisters. For the very first time since meeting this perplexing family, Sarah found herself unexpectedly alone with the children, momentarily free, if only briefly, from their father's constant, ever-watchful, and unnerving presence. Sophia and Isabella sat perfectly still, their eyes resolutely downcast, but little Lucia suddenly seemed to perk up considerably. She approached Sarah with an unexpected burst of animation and energy. Dad told us we're all going to the USA, she exclaimed, her small voice filled with discernible excitement. Sarah smiled warmly, genuinely charmed by the child's sudden, innocent enthusiasm. Yes, that's right, sweetheart. Dad said we can finally dance there, and maybe we'll even get famous. Lucia continued eagerly, beginning to sway her little body back and forth in an impromptu, joyful dance right there in the room. Will you dance with me too? She asked innocently. Oh, I'm so sorry, sweetie, but I can't dance right now, Sarah replied gently, somewhat surprised by the girl's sudden, uncharacteristic talkativeness. I still have to finish giving you your important shots. Undeterred by the refusal, Lucia continued dancing happily on her own, enthusiastically raising her small arms above her head in joyful, uninhibited movements. As the child's sleeve inadvertently pulled back during her dance, Sarah noticed something concerning on her right arm, a distinct series of small, faint bruises that looked remarkably similar to tiny pinprick marks, very much like those often left behind by repeated foreign injections or frequent blood draws. She was certain she hadn't noticed them earlier when she had drawn blood from the girl's other arm. Lucia, honey, what happened here? Sarah asked gently, carefully touching the concerning marks on the child's arm. The little girl paused her enthusiastic dancing and looked down at her own arm with only mild, detached curiosity. Oh, I was sick, she stated simply matter-of-factly. Dad gave me some medicine to make me better. Sarah's heart rate instantly quickened, a cold dread washing over her. Was this at the hospital? She inquired carefully. Lucia shook her head definitively. No, it was at home. He often gives me medicine. He says I'm sick a lot. Her voice suddenly dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. But the medicine always makes me feel really sleepy all the time, even when I really want to dance like this. Sarah struggled intensely to keep her facial expression completely neutral and professional despite the deafening alarm bells now ringing furiously in her mind. When was the very last time he gave you this medicine? She asked, trying to sound casual. Just before we came here tonight, Lucia replied innocently, immediately resuming her joyful, spinning dance. Sarah's gaze instantly shifted to the other girls still sitting silently on the chairs. She quickly pulled out her small penlight from her pocket and rapidly checked each of their pupils, finding them all to be slightly, but noticeably dilated, though perhaps not dramatically so. She then carefully checked their arms as well, and discovered similar faint pinprick marks on all of them. The disparate pieces of the puzzle suddenly, horrifyingly clicked together in her mind. Michael could very likely be drugging his own children, probably with mild sedatives, simply to keep them quiet, docile, and compliant during their journey and interactions. However, this alarming realization didn't quite make sense when reconciled with the official lab results she had just reviewed moments ago. If the girls truly had sedative drugs currently in their systems, the comprehensive blood test should absolutely have detected and shown it clearly. Acting purely on instinct, driven now by her rapidly growing and undeniable suspicion, Sarah swiftly grabbed a clean syringe and fresh blood collection equipment from a nearby supply drawer. She knew deep down that this action was strictly against established hospital protocol, and if Michael or anyone else were to catch her doing this unsanctioned procedure, she could potentially face serious professional trouble, possibly even losing her license. But something fundamentally didn't add up. The discrepancy was too significant to ignore. The girls weren't just naturally sleepy from a long day. They seemed to be genuinely under the influence of something. Lucia, she said softly, her voice barely betraying the turmoil and unease churning inside her. I just need to take just a tiny little bit more blood from you and your sisters, okay? Okay. The little girl nodded trustingly, readily extending her small arm without any hesitation or question. Sarah worked with practiced rapidity, deftly taking another small blood sample from Lucia, then quickly moving on to collect samples from Anna, Isabella, and finally Sophia. Each girl complied without any resistance whatsoever, their continued docility now seeming profoundly sinister and deeply disturbing rather than merely unusual or well-behaved. Sarah labeled each new sample meticulously, then quickly concealed them securely inside one of the upper supply cabinets, just as the examination room door opened abruptly, and Michael returned with a still, pale-looking Valentina. "She's still feeling sick," Michael reported curtly, his voice tinged with noticeable irritation. He leaned down and whispered something harshly into Valentina's ear, and the girl kept her eyes lowered, avoiding any eye contact. "Get a hold of yourself," Sarah distinctly heard him mutter under his breath. "This is just a simple vaccination. Don't act like a baby. It's perfectly normal to feel a little nervous before getting vaccinations," Sarah assured them both calmly, trying to diffuse the tension, though her attention was primarily drawn to Lucia, who was now dancing energetically around the small room, seemingly becoming more alert and animated by the minute. A stark, jarring contrast to the quiet, drowsy little girl Sarah had first encountered in the waiting room. If she had indeed been given some sort of sedative earlier, it appeared as though its effects, whatever the specific drug was, were rapidly starting to wear off. Lucia's sudden, unexpected burst of vibrant energy only served to deepen Sarah's already profound suspicion, and she couldn't help but mentally compare Lucia's lively behavior with the other older girls, who all remained eerily still, quiet, and visibly sluggish in their seats. Michael stared intently first at Sarah, then sharply at his youngest daughter, his expression darkening ominously. "Lucia," he commanded sharply, his voice laced with authority. "Sit down now." Sarah immediately sensed the palpable tension rising rapidly in the confined space of the room. "Perhaps we should all take just a short break for a moment," she suggested calmly, moving strategically toward the door as she spoke. "I'll give you all a minute to collect yourselves." But just as she reached out for the cool metal door handle, a sudden, icy chill ran swiftly down her spine. Michael was watching her with a newfound, terrifying intensity that made her breath catch sharply in her throat. Before Sarah could fully grasp the handle and open the door, Michael stepped quickly forward and decisively closed the door completely. The soft, definitive click of the lock engaging echoed loudly in the sudden silence, sending an immediate wave of visceral fear surging through her entire body. He now stood directly between her and the only exit, his previously nervous, anxious demeanor completely replaced by something far more menacing and threatening. "You know, don't you?" His voice was chillingly low, cold, and measured. Sarah forced herself to appear confused and innocent. "I'm sorry, Mr. Rodriguez. I don't understand what you mean." Michael's eyes narrowed dangerously as he studied her face intently for any sign of deception. A slow, chillingly humorless smile gradually spread across his features. "Oh, I think you do understand perfectly. Little Lucia must have said something incriminating. She's always been a little radio, that one," he remarked cryptically. Then, with a terrifyingly swift movement that made Sarah gasp involuntarily, he reached smoothly into his waistband and pulled out a small, dark handgun. The girls remained eerily, unnaturally quiet, frozen in place. Even little Lucia stopped her dancing instantly at the shocking sight of the deadly weapon. Only Valentina made a small, frightened, whimpering sound, which was quickly silenced by a single sharp, warning glance from her father. "Please," Sarah whispered desperately, raising her hands slightly in a placating gesture. "There's absolutely no need for that. I honestly, truly don't know what you're talking about." Michael's cold, harsh laugh echoed unnervingly through the sterile examination room, sending another profound chill down Sarah's already trembling spine. "Yes, you most certainly do," he countered firmly, his voice like ice as he fixed his intense gaze pointedly on the still rolled-up sleeves of the girl's arms. Sarah realized with a sudden, sickening jolt of awareness that she had completely forgotten to loosen their sleeves after taking the unauthorized second set of blood samples in her desperate rush and mounting panic. "You saw their needle marks, didn't you?" Michael continued relentlessly, his tone remaining unnervingly calm and conversational despite the circumstances. "And now that you know the truth, there are really only two possible ways out of this unfortunate situation for you." He took a deliberate step closer, the gun held steady and unwavering in his hand, its mere presence radiating a silent but deadly threat. Option 1, he began outlining coldly. I simply kill you right here with this quiet, silenced gun, and then securely lock this room from the outside. You'll likely bleed out slowly before anyone even thinks to find you tomorrow morning when the clinic eventually reopens. And by that time, trust me, I'll be long, long gone. I have influential friends here too. People who can easily help me disappear without a trace. Sarah felt the warm blood drain completely from her face, her heart hammering so violently against her ribs, she was absolutely certain everyone else in the small room could clearly hear it pounding. The hidden blood samples she had stashed in the drawer suddenly felt like they were burning a hole right through the cabinet, a tangible representation of her perilous discovery. Or option 2. Michael continued smoothly, presenting the alternative. We work together, you and I. I'll generously give you a significant portion of the money I earn after I successfully get these girls safely across the U.S. border into their new lives. He then named a specific monetary figure that made Sarah's eyes widen involuntarily despite her overwhelming fear. Even just a quarter of that substantial amount would make you incredibly rich, Sarah. You could easily leave this ratchet, run-down part of the USA behind forever and move somewhere much better, somewhere you truly deserve. We both win in this scenario, see? He gestured vaguely toward the silent, frightened girls with his free hand. Honestly, I wouldn't really like option 1 either, because then everything just becomes unnecessarily messy and complicated. His voice suddenly hardened, losing its persuasive tone. So, what's it going to be, Nurse Sarah? Make your choice, quickly now. The cold, unforgiving metal edge of the gun pressed firmly against Sarah's cheek, chilling her to the bone. Please, she begged again, genuine tears now welling up in her terrified eyes and spilling down her cheeks. I promise you. I swear I won't say a single word to anyone. Just please don't hurt me or these innocent girls. Michael studied her tear-streaked face intently for what felt like an absolute eternity before finally lowering the gun ever so slightly. Good, he said finally, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. That's definitely the smart choice. He gestured pointedly toward the vaccination tray with the gun still in his hand. Now, finish your job properly. Vaccinate the rest of my daughters immediately. With visibly trembling hands, Sarah somehow managed to prepare the remaining vaccines for Valentina, Anna, and Lucia. Her mind raced frantically, desperately trying to formulate any possible way out of this terrifying, nightmarish situation while simultaneously following Michael's explicit, life-threatening orders. The girls submitted passively to the injections in complete silence, their frightened eyes darting occasionally toward the menacing gun still clearly visible clutched in their father's hand. Very good. Michael commented approvingly when Sarah had finally administered the very last required vaccine to little Lucia. Now, sign all the official vaccination papers. Make it look completely legitimate and official. Sarah complied immediately, her signature barely legible due to her uncontrollably shaking hand. As she quickly filled out the necessary paperwork, Michael leaned in uncomfortably close, his warm breath hot and unwelcome against her ear. Keep that pretty mouth shut tight, understand? He whispered menacingly. Absolutely no police involvement, got it? And he continued, his voice dropping lower. Before you even know it, I'll personally come back with your share of the money, probably in just 2 days or so. But he paused, letting the implied threat hang heavy and palpable in the tense air for a long moment. If you dare to talk to anyone about this, well, then there will be no money for you, obviously. And remember, my people are absolutely everywhere, even right here inside this very hospital. You could just be walking around a corner, minding your own business, and you would never know if you would ever see another daylight again. Understand? Sarah nodded rapidly, desperately trying to appear fully compliant and non-threatening. Yes, I understand completely. I promise I won't say anything at all. Smart girl, Michael said, seemingly satisfied as he carefully tucked the gun back into his waistband, pulling his loose shirt down to conceal it from view. We just need to quickly finish up at the cashier's desk before we can finally leave. Come on now, girls, let's go. He swiftly herded the subdued children toward the door, pausing only briefly to give Sarah one last, intensely threatening look before finally exiting the room. 2 days, he reminded her sternly just before the door closed completely. Remember exactly what I said. As the door clicked shut behind them, Sarah collapsed heavily into a nearby chair, her entire body shaking uncontrollably with a potent mixture of residual fear and surging adrenaline. She took several long, deep, ragged breaths, desperately trying to calm herself down enough to think clearly and rationally. Michael hadn't seemed suspicious about the second set of blood samples she had hastily hidden. He hadn't mentioned them at all. After several more minutes of focused, deep breathing exercises, Sarah managed to steady her trembling hands enough to stand up on shaky legs. She reached up carefully into the supply cabinet and cautiously extracted the 4 small blood sample vials she had hidden there earlier. The vials felt impossibly heavy and significant in her hand, representing both immense danger and a glimmer of hope simultaneously. She knew she absolutely needed to get these samples tested again, properly tested this time, by someone trustworthy. But who within the clinic could she possibly trust now? Michael's chilling words echoed ominously in her mind. My people are everywhere, even in this hospital. If that terrifying statement was indeed true, then the initial normal lab results she had received earlier from Donnie Rain were almost certainly falsified, likely by someone directly on Michael's payroll or under his coercion. Sarah peered cautiously out into the hallway through the small window in the door. It appeared nearly empty now as closing time approached. Only a few lingering patients remained near the pharmacy area, and less than a dozen people were queued up at the cashier's desk, including Michael and the 5 girls, while most of the clinic staff were visibly winding down their activities, preparing for the end of their long shift. Slipping quietly out of the examination room, she moved as quickly but silently as possible down the corridor toward the lab once more, the crucial vials tucked securely and discreetly inside her scrub pocket, her mind racing frantically with possibilities and potential plans for what to do next. The walk back to the lab felt interminable this time, each passing colleague potentially representing a hidden threat or an informant. Sarah found herself instinctively scrutinizing every face she encountered, wondering desperately if they were one of the dangerous people Michael had menacingly mentioned. Could she truly trust anyone here now? Carlos, her fellow nurse, had seemed somewhat dismissive of her earlier concerns about Michael and the girl's behavior. Was he somehow involved in this sinister operation, or simply jaded and desensitized from years of working in the challenging environment of a border town clinic? When she finally reached the lab again, Sarah felt a wave of immense relief wash over her as she saw a different technician working behind the window, one she didn't immediately recognize. He was a younger man with kind, approachable eyes, who looked up curiously at her hurried approach. I need these specific samples tested urgently, right away, please, Sarah stated firmly, managing to keep her voice surprisingly steady despite her racing heart and trembling hands. It's the very last test for the day. I promise, she added quickly, hoping to preempt any objections. The technician, whose name badge clearly read Marcus, sighed tiredly, glancing at the clock. Ma'am, we're just about to close up shop for the night. I know, and I'm truly sorry to ask this of you, Sarah said sincerely, glancing nervously back over her shoulder down the empty hallway. But it's incredibly important, potentially life-saving. Marcus seemed to immediately sense her palpable urgency and genuine distress. Is everything all right? He asked concernedly, taking the 4 small vials carefully from her outstretched, trembling hand. Yes, Sarah replied quickly, perhaps a little too quickly. Everything's perfectly fine now. Marcus looked understandably doubtful at her hasty reassurance, but simply nodded. Okay, I'll run them for you right now. Do you want to wait here for the results? Or should I just page you when they're ready? I'll wait right here, Sarah stated firmly, not wanting to risk having these critical results potentially intercepted or tampered with again. Thank you so much, Marcus. I really appreciate this. She positioned herself anxiously in a chair, situated near the lab window, her eyes fixed intently on the main corridor door, mentally prepared to flee instantly at the very first sign of Michael returning or anyone else who might potentially be working with him. Her mind raced uncontrollably with unanswered questions. Who exactly was that mysterious man Michael had met covertly in the parking lot earlier? Was it indeed Donnie, the seemingly affable lab technician who had deliberately provided her with the falsified results just a short while ago? Where was the supposedly esteemed Dr. Briggs at this moment? And what, if any, was his true connection to this entire horrifying situation? After what felt subjectively like agonizing hours, but was realistically only about 10 minutes, Marcus approached the window again, his expression now etched with visible concern. "These results," he began quietly, sliding the freshly printed reports towards Sarah through the opening. "They clearly show traces of a sedative drug present in the blood. It's not a particularly large amount," he clarified, "but it's definitely present in all 4 of these samples, except perhaps for the youngest child, who only shows minimal residual traces left in her system, suggesting the dose is wearing off." He looked at Sarah pointedly. Where exactly did these specific samples come from? Sarah's worst suspicions were now terrifyingly confirmed by concrete evidence. She hesitated for a long moment, internally torn between her primal fear for her own personal safety and her deeply ingrained professional duty to protect these vulnerable children from further harm. "Are you at all familiar with Donnie Rain, the other lab tech who was working the earlier shift today?" she asked cautiously, choosing her words carefully. Marcus nodded readily. "Yeah, Donnie. He actually left his shift quite early today. Said he had some kind of family emergency come up suddenly. I urgently need to see the digital copies of some previous tests that he personally signed off on earlier," Sarah requested, her voice barely rising above a strained whisper. "They were for patients named Valentina, Anna, and Lucia Rodriguez. They should have been processed sometime earlier this evening." Looking understandably confused, but remaining cooperative, Marcus quickly accessed the clinic's computer system and efficiently printed out the requested historical documents for her. Sarah immediately spread them out side by side on the counter, carefully comparing them with the brand new results Marcus had just generated. The differences were stark and undeniable. The earlier tests, signed by Donnie, showed absolutely no trace of any foreign substances whatsoever, while the new results clearly indicated the presence of sedatives in the girl's systems. Marcus leaned closer over her shoulder, his eyes widening in disbelief as he fully realized the blatant discrepancy. These can't possibly both be right," he stammered softly, shocked. "Someone deliberately falsified those earlier results." Sarah nodded grimly, her stomach churning. "Yes, and I strongly suspect Donnie Rain might be directly involved. Earlier this evening, I'm pretty sure I saw him talking covertly to a man named Michael Rodriguez, the father of these children, out in the clinic parking lot. It wasn't entirely clear from my vantage point," she admitted, "but the jawline, the hairstyle, it really looked like him." "Does that sound like something Donnie might do?" Marcus's expression turned instantly grave. "We absolutely need to report this to the police immediately. Sarah, whether it was definitely Donnie you saw or not," he stated firmly, his voice filled with conviction. "Even just the clearly falsified lab results alone are more than enough grounds. Those poor children could be in very real, imminent danger." Sarah quickly hushed him, glancing anxiously around the now nearly empty lab area. "Please, keep your voice down," she pleaded urgently. "Michael explicitly threatened me. He said he has people everywhere inside this clinic." She then quickly proceeded to describe in hushed tones exactly what had transpired in the examination room just moments before. Michael's chilling threats, the terrifying presence of the gun, and what little Lucia had innocently revealed about being regularly drugged by her own father. As she finally spoke the words aloud, sharing the terrifying burden, she felt a palpable weight begin to lift slightly from her shoulders. Finally, someone else knew the truth, someone believed her. "We definitely need to be extremely careful moving forward," she concluded somberly. "And I strongly suspect Dr. Briggs might be involved in this somehow, too. Michael specifically asked for him by name upon arrival, and he seemed incredibly nervous and agitated when he learned the doctor wasn't actually here today. Marcus nodded thoughtfully, processing the new information. That might actually explain some things, he murmured, leaning closer conspiratorially. Look, I really don't want to spread unfounded rumors, but honestly, there have been some strange and unexplained things happening with sample processing here lately. Some of us techs have noticed occasional inconsistencies, particularly with test results belonging to patients of certain specific doctors, including patients of Dr. Briggs. Sarah pressed urgently. Yes, Marcus confirmed grimly, including his. But, no one really wants to make direct accusations against a senior doctor like him without concrete, undeniable proof. Sarah held up the damning, conflicting test results. Well, she stated firmly, I think now we finally have some solid proof. They looked at each other intently for a long, heavy moment, the full gravity and potential danger of the situation settling heavily between them in the quiet lab. Elena briefly thought about the substantial amount of money Michael had brazenly offered her, a potential fortune that could drastically change her entire life, and immediately felt physically sickened at the horrifying idea that anyone could possibly accept such blood money, willingly looking the other way, while innocent children were clearly being exploited and endangered. We absolutely need to call the police right now, she declared finally, her voice now firm with newfound resolve and conviction. Those poor girls desperately need help, and they need it immediately. Marcus nodded decisively, reaching without hesitation for the telephone situated on the lab counter. With fingers that still trembled slightly, Sarah carefully dialed 911, fully prepared now to risk everything. Her job, her safety, perhaps even her life, to save these 5 young, innocent lives from whatever terrible, unimaginable fate likely awaited them just across the border. The next few minutes passed in a tense, adrenaline-fueled blur as Sarah urgently reported the entire unfolding situation to the calm, professional 911 dispatcher on the other end of the line. She provided all the necessary details about Michael Rodriguez, the 5 young girls, the clearly falsified lab results providing evidence of drugging, and the direct, explicit threat Michael had made against her life just moments before. The dispatcher listened intently, asked clarifying questions, and then assured her emphatically that police officers were already en route to the clinic and instructed her firmly to remain safely where she was, inside the locked lab, until they arrived on the scene. After hanging up the phone, Sarah immediately peered out again through the lab windows, looking anxiously toward the clinic's main entrance and lobby area. Her heart sank abruptly as she spotted Michael and the 5 girls standing right at the cashier's desk, seemingly completing their payment transaction. They would be leaving the clinic any second now. Oh no, I have to somehow stall them, she whispered urgently to Marcus, her mind racing. The police might not get here quite in time to intercept them before they leave. Before Marcus could even voice an objection or suggest an alternative, Sarah was already moving decisively, hurrying quickly back through the now mostly deserted corridors toward the front lobby of the clinic. She emerged into the main lobby area, just as Michael was firmly herding the weary girls toward the main exit doors. "Mr. Rodriguez," she called out, forcing a calm, professional smile onto her face despite the fear churning inside her. "I just need to speak with you briefly about." Michael turned around sharply, his expression immediately tightening, a guarded, suspicious edge creeping into his voice. "Whatever you think you need to say, we can certainly talk about it some other time. We're leaving now, but it's regarding your asylum application," Sarah improvised quickly, desperately trying to buy more time. Michael completely ignored her attempt and resumed walking determinedly toward the exit door. Just then, the faint but distinct wail of approaching police sirens began to pierce through the relative quiet of the clinic walls, growing rapidly louder. Michael froze instantly mid-step, his head snapping sharply toward the direction of the sound, his eyes narrowing dangerously with dawning suspicion. "What did you do?" he hissed menacingly, whirling back to face Sarah, his voice sharp and dripping with betrayal as he reached instinctively toward his waistband and swiftly drew the handgun once more. Audible gasps rippled through the remaining staff and the few lingering patients still present in the hallway as they turned abruptly toward the escalating commotion, their expressions shifting rapidly from simple confusion to outright fear. Sarah instinctively took a cautious step back, her heart pounding violently against her ribs, but her voice somehow rang out remarkably clear and steady over the suddenly growing tension in the lobby. "Everyone, please stay calm. Move away from the main hallway immediately and get to safety." Michael tightened his grip menacingly on the trigger and swung the gun directly towards Sarah, his eyes locked onto her with chilling, deadly focus. So intent and focused was his aim on Sarah that he failed to notice the clinic's uniformed security guard rapidly closing in on him from behind. In one swift, decisive motion, the guard expertly grabbed Michael's arm, forcefully twisting his wrist in a practiced, disarming hold. The gun fired unexpectedly, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. It was too late to stop the discharge completely, but the shot went wild due to the guard's intervention, the bullet slamming harmlessly into the acoustic ceiling tiles directly above them. Shouts and screams erupted all around them as the hallway instantly descended into utter chaos, with people ducking low and scrambling frantically for any available cover. Marcus, who had followed Sarah out from the lab, lunged bravely into action without hesitation, joining the security guard in forcefully restraining the struggling Michael. With one swift, well-aimed kick, Marcus knocked the handgun cleanly from Michael's grasp, sending it skidding harmlessly across the polished floor several feet away. As Michael continued to struggle violently against their combined hold, more clinic personnel rushed in to assist. 2 other nurses and a medical assistant quickly helped to pin him securely down and effectively secure his flailing limbs. The scene remained chaotic for another tense moment, but within seconds, Michael was fully and securely restrained on the floor, his initial fury now reduced to muffled curses and threats beneath the collective weight holding him firmly down. Taking charge of the situation, Sarah raised her voice clearly above the din. "I called the police because that patient directly threatened my life and is actively endangering those children," she announced loudly and clearly, pointing directly at the subdued Michael on the floor. Just then, multiple police cruisers pulled up swiftly outside the clinic's main entrance, their emergency lights flashing brightly through the glass doors, bathing the lobby in rhythmic pulses of red and blue light. Several officers entered the clinic swiftly and purposefully, their service weapons drawn but held in a low-ready position, not aimed directly at anyone yet. "Everyone stay calm," the lead officer commanded authoritatively, his voice projecting confidence. "Which one of these individuals is Michael Rodriguez?" Pinned securely to the ground by clinic staff, Michael thrashed once more in futile resistance before finally going still, his eyes darting wildly around the lobby as he desperately grasped for some measure of control over the rapidly deteriorating situation. "This nurse is corrupt," he suddenly shouted, his voice echoing loudly down the now silent hallway. He pointed an accusing finger directly at Sarah. "She tried to frame me and my innocent daughters with completely fake lab test reports." He then turned his desperate gaze toward the various clinic staff members gathered nervously nearby. "You all know me. You've seen me coming here regularly before. Tell them, I'm just a regular patient here." A tense, uncomfortable silence followed his outburst as Michael started calling out specific staff names he recognized, pointedly including Carlos, the male nurse who had earlier dismissed Sarah's initial concerns. "Tell them, Carlos. Tell them, I'm a regular patient." The staff members he addressed looked at each other uncomfortably, shifting their weight, clearly no one willing to speak up immediately under the intense scrutiny of the uniformed police officers. One of the officers then approached Carlos directly. "Sir, is what this man is saying true?" the officer inquired calmly but firmly. Carlos hesitated visibly, his eyes glancing nervously between the restrained Michael on the floor and the expectant police officer standing before him. Finally, his shoulders slumped in resignation. "No, yes, partly," he murmured, his voice barely audible above a whisper. "Michael, And sometimes as accomplices, they did come here sometimes, yes. Always with different groups of young girls, though. His voice gained a bit more strength as he continued. Some of us nurses, we knew deep down something wasn't quite right, but well, not everyone was sure, or maybe some were afraid to speak up. He took a deep breath, shame coloring his features. He promised to pay some of us, well, to just keep quiet about certain things, certain irregularities. And he also threatened us, implied consequences if we ever spoke about any of it to the police or authorities. The lead officer immediately turned to his colleagues. All right, we need backup units notified. Take them all into custody for thorough questioning down at the station. Starting with him, he indicated Michael and anyone else potentially involved. As several officers moved efficiently to formally arrest Michael and read him his rights, Sarah stepped forward again. Wait, there are potentially 2 more individuals involved who aren't currently here, she informed them urgently. Dr. Alan Briggs, the physician he initially asked for, and a lab technician named Donnie Rain. The lead officer nodded gravely, his expression serious. Dr. Briggs, yes, he has recently become a prime suspect in connection with another ongoing investigation, he revealed significantly. We've actually been actively looking for him since yesterday afternoon. That certainly explains why I couldn't reach him by phone earlier today, Sarah murmured thoughtfully, the pieces falling into place. Do you have any physical evidence of those falsified tests you mentioned? Another officer asked Sarah directly. Sarah immediately gestured toward Marcus, the brave lab technician who had cautiously followed her out from the lab and was now standing nearby, carefully holding both sets of crucial test results in his hands. Yes, right here, she confirmed, taking the papers from Marcus. These original tests, signed by Donnie Rain, were clearly altered to deliberately hide the presence of sedatives in the children's bloodstreams. These, she held up the second set, are the accurate results showing the drugs. As the officers began carefully examining the presented evidence, bagging it according to procedure, other police personnel were gently attending to the 5 frightened Rodriguez girls, who stood huddled closely together near the entrance, looking utterly confused, scared, and overwhelmed by the traumatic events unfolding around them. Lucia, the youngest, still seemed the most outwardly alert of the group, though even she too was now beginning to show visible signs of sleepiness as the long, stressful night finally wore on and the sedative continued its effects. They will all definitely need immediate medical attention and evaluation, Sarah explained earnestly to a compassionate female officer who was trying to comfort the children. They appear to have been drugged regularly over some period of time, according to what the youngest child, Lucia, inadvertently told me earlier. Michael, now securely in handcuffs, was being firmly led by officers toward the main exit door. As he passed by Sarah, he suddenly began pleading desperately, his voice strained with panic. Listen to me. Please, you have to listen. I'm not operating alone in this. I swear, I can give you valuable information, names, locations, routes, everything you need. In exchange for some leniency, please. An officer attempted to quiet him down, reminding him of his right to remain silent. But Michael continued frantically, his voice rising further with sheer panic. Please, I owe some very dangerous men a lot of money. They forced me to do this. My own family back home is in terrible danger if I don't deliver. Save it for the station, sir, the officer repeated firmly, continuing to guide him steadily outside toward a waiting patrol car. As Sarah watched Michael being placed securely into the back of the police car, she vividly remembered the fragmented phone conversation she had accidentally overheard earlier in the evening, his desperate, urgent promise to pay someone back by tomorrow. It seemed increasingly likely that Michael himself was deeply caught in a dangerous web of significant debt and relentless coercion, though that realization did absolutely nothing to excuse his horrific actions toward these 5 innocent, vulnerable young girls. She approached the detective who appeared to be taking charge of the overall investigation at the scene. Detective, I overheard him on a phone call earlier tonight, she explained quickly, providing context. It definitely sounded like he was heavily in debt to someone, which might explain why he was in such a desperate rush to get the girls vaccinated today and presumably across the border, as soon as possible. He likely needed the money from trafficking them very quickly. The detective nodded thoughtfully, absorbing the information. Thank you, nurse. We'll certainly investigate how deep this entire network goes. Unfortunately, these human trafficking operations often operate with multiple complex layers of people involved, some of whom are, indeed, themselves being coerced or threatened by those higher up in the organization. A Child Protective Services (CPS) worker arrived on the scene shortly thereafter, introducing herself professionally to Sarah and the lead police officers. These girls are confirmed Mexican nationals, the CPS worker explained after conducting a brief initial assessment and speaking gently with the children. We will immediately begin working closely with the relevant Mexican authorities to find them a safe, secure placement, hopefully with relatives if possible, or in protective custody back in Mexico. She lowered her voice slightly. Based on their general condition, the drugging evidence, and what you've reported, Nurse Miller, it tragically seems quite likely they were being trafficked into a horrific prostitution ring across the border, but naturally we still need to confirm all the details through further investigation and interviews. Sarah felt her heart break profoundly at the chilling thought of what might have awaited these innocent children had they successfully crossed the border under Michael's control. They deserve so much better than this awful fate, she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. The CPS worker nodded in somber agreement. Unfortunately, we encounter tragic cases like this far more often than you might think, especially in border regions, she sighed sadly. But thanks entirely to your courageous intervention tonight, nurse, these specific girls now actually have a chance at reclaiming some semblance of a normal, safe life. As the official investigation continued methodically around her, Sarah approached the girls one last time. They were being gently attended to by other medical personnel, preparing them for transport. Lucia looked up tiredly as Sarah knelt down beside her chair. Are you a dancer, too? The little girl asked again, her earlier vibrant energy now significantly dimmed by overwhelming fatigue and the lingering effects of the sedative. Sarah managed a gentle, reassuring smile. No, sweetheart, I'm not a dancer, she replied softly. I'm a nurse. My job is to help people get better when they're sick or hurt. But am I really sick? Lucia asked earnestly, her large, innocent eyes searching Sarah's face for truth. Dad always said I was sick. No, Sarah assured her firmly, fighting back fresh tears that threatened to fall. You are absolutely not sick, Lucia. You are a beautiful, strong, healthy little girl, and I promise you, you're going to be okay now. You're safe. As the girls were carefully prepared for transport to a proper medical facility for further evaluation and care, Sarah made a silent, solemn promise to herself. She would diligently follow up on their case, doing everything in her power to ensure they found a truly safe, nurturing home environment where they could simply be children again, where they could freely dance if they wanted to, play without fear, learn, grow, and finally begin to heal from their trauma. The terrifying events of this single evening had undeniably shaken her fundamental faith in people to its core, but they had also powerfully reinforced the critical importance of always trusting her instincts, even when others dismissed her concerns. In this complex, often challenging small border town environment, where desperation and illicit opportunity frequently combined to create a uniquely dangerous mixture, unwavering vigilance could literally mean the difference between life and a fate potentially worse than death for the most vulnerable members of the community. As she watched the 5 girls being gently led outside to a waiting ambulance, Sarah thought compassionately about the countless other unseen, unheard individuals who might be currently caught in similar horrific situations, vulnerable children and adults who desperately needed someone, anyone, to simply notice them, to dare to question the suspicious circumstances, and crucially, to bravely act on their behalf. Today, she had been that someone for these 5 young girls. Tomorrow, she resolved perhaps she would have the strength and opportunity to be that someone for others in desperate need. In the end, that profound desire to help and heal was precisely why she had chosen to become a nurse in the first place. not just to clinically treat illnesses and injuries, but to actively help heal lives and restore hope. Tonight, despite the very real danger and overwhelming fear she had faced, she knew with certainty that she had done exactly that. And absolutely no amount of illicit money in the world could ever possibly replace the profound, deeply satisfying feeling of knowing unequivocally that she had made the right, ethical choice when it mattered the absolute most. Thank you for reading this story. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel for more content like this.